When we think of Christmas today, the true meaning often conjures images of nativity scenes, carols, and the story of Jesus' birth in a humble stable. But what if I told you that the roots of Christmas stretch far beyond Bethlehem, into the icy forests and fire-lit halls of ancient pagan Europe? What if the true meaning of this holiday has nothing to do with Jesus at all, and even his existence has no more evidence than Gandalf the Grey? Evidence for Jesus' life is scarce. Outside of the Bible, written by many authors, decades after his supposed death, historians of the time offer little more than passing mentions. Flimsy, edited passages in Josephus or Tacitus seem less like concrete proof and more like footnotes scribbled in the margins of history. Imagine if someone who stumbled upon a copy of Lord of the Rings 1,000 years from now believed that Gandalf once walked among us. Absurd. Yet the story of Jesus became the cornerstone of Western religion, shaping centuries of belief and tradition, including Christmas. Long before Christianity's rise, Midwinter festivals were already thriving. The Roman festival of Saturnalia, celebrated in late December, honored Saturn, the god of agriculture, with feasting and gift-giving. Slaves dined with their masters, and for a few days, the rigid structures of Roman life melted into revelry. Meanwhile, the Norse marked Yule, a festival tied to the winter solstice. It was a time to honor the return of the sun, when the darkest nights began to retreat, and light promised life's renewal. The Christmas tree, a ubiquitous symbol of the holiday, has roots that trace back to ancient pagan traditions, particularly those of Yule and Saturnalia. In pre-Christian Europe, evergreen trees symbolized life and resilience during the harsh winter months. During Yule, celebrated by Germanic and Norse peoples, these trees were often brought into homes or decorated with offerings to spirits or gods, honoring the endurance of nature through the dark season. Similarly, the Yule Log, a massive piece of wood that was burned throughout the festival, was both a symbol of warmth and a ritual to ward off evil spirits while inviting good fortune. In Saturnalia, Romans adorned their homes with greenery, like holly and ivy, to celebrate Saturn, the god of agriculture. These traditions of greenery and decoration survived Christianization, transforming into the modern Christmas tree and wreaths, though their original meanings have long been lost. These were celebrations of nature's cycles, of survival, death, and rebirth. In some traditions, rituals even included psychedelic experiences. Evidence suggests that shamans in northern Europe may have consumed Amanita muscaria, the red and white mushroom, to enter altered states of consciousness. These experiences were deeply spiritual, tied to the mysteries of existence and the shifting of seasons. Some theories even link this imagery to presents under the Christmas tree, just like the mushroom's red and white characteristic. But now, enter Christianity, a faith born from a persecuted minority in the Roman Empire, but one destined to dominate. By the 4th century, with Emperor Constantine's conversion, Christianity shifted from a humble sect to the empire's official religion. The church faced a dilemma: how to stamp out deeply rooted pagan traditions without alienating the masses. Their solution was to repurpose the rituals, rename the gods, and overwrite the festivals. For the first few centuries after its inception, Christianity was a fringe movement, a persecuted sect viewed with suspicion by the Roman authorities. Early Christians refused to participate in the state-sanctioned worship of Roman gods, a defiance that was seen as both heretical and politically subversive. They were martyred in public spectacles, forced into hiding, and scattered across the empire. But what began as a persecuted faith ultimately became a tool of imperial power, a transformation that would lead to the systematic destruction and repurposing of pagan traditions, temples, and communities. The turning point came with Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century. His conversion to Christianity marked a seismic shift, culminating in the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which legalized the faith. Within a few decades, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity became the Roman Empire's official religion. Paganism was dominant across much of Europe, but within the Roman Empire, it was suddenly outlawed. Temples were destroyed, their treasures confiscated, and their rituals banned. Pagan priests were brutally murdered or forced to convert, and the sacred sites of polytheistic worship were either abandoned or transformed into Christian churches. Power was now wielded not just militarily, but spiritually, with Christianity as its unifying banner. Across Europe, evidence of Christianity's repurposing of pagan sacred sites is etched into the very stones of medieval churches and cathedrals. The famous Canterbury Cathedral in England, for example, was constructed on the site of an earlier pagan temple. In London, St. Paul's Cathedral stands where a Roman temple dedicated to Diana once stood. Beneath many churches, archaeologists have uncovered remnants of pagan altars, and many churchyards align with solstice markers, linking them to older, nature-based spiritual practices. This was no coincidence. It was a calculated move by the Christians to absorb pagan sanctity, ensuring their gods were forgotten while their holy places were rebranded for Christian worship. The essence of this militarized Christianity can still be heard in hymns like "Onward, Christian Soldiers," where spreading the gospel is likened to marching into war, a far cry from peaceful pagan traditions rooted in nature. The destruction of pagan temples by Christianity was brutal. The Serapeum of Alexandria, one of the ancient world's greatest temples, was destroyed by Christian mobs in 391 CE under the orders of Theophilus, the Patriarch of Alexandria. Statues of pagan gods were smashed and defaced, their eyes gouged out as if to symbolically blind their power. Sacred groves and altars, long held as places of communion with nature and the divine, were desecrated or burned to the ground. These actions weren't isolated. They were part of a deliberate campaign to eradicate competing belief systems and consolidate Christianity's dominance. They didn't just destroy, but they repurposed. Temples were rededicated to saints, their grandeur rebranded for Christian worship. The Parthenon in Athens, for example, originally a temple to Athena, was transformed into a Christian church. Even pagan holidays were not spared. The church adopted the timing of major pagan festivals, replacing them with Christian meanings to ease the transition for converts. The rural pagan populations, derogatorily referred to as Pagani, meaning country dwellers, faced the brunt of these campaigns. Unlike urban centers, where the political machinery of the church was strongest, rural communities clung stubbornly to their traditions. To suppress these holdouts, missionaries and Christian rulers resorted to violence. Charlemagne's Saxon wars in the 8th century demonstrate this. Entire villages were destroyed, and the sacred Saxon pillar known as the Irminsul was cut down, symbolizing the defeat of their gods. Those who refused to convert, they faced execution, exile, or enslavement. Christianity's dominance continued to build its beliefs onto pre-existing structures. Pagan gods were not merely erased, but reimagined as saints or demons. The Celtic goddess Brigid, for instance, was Christianized as Saint Brigid, her sacred wells and fire rituals absorbed into Christian tradition. Old superstitions were rebranded as sins or integrated into the new faith, ensuring that the people could retain a sense of familiarity, even as their spiritual world was reshaped. This was a long and brutal process. Paganism didn't vanish overnight, and syncretism, which is a blending of pagan and Christian practices, was inevitable. As the pagan temples, villages, and cultures were wiped out, the world was forcibly reimagined through a Christian lens. But beneath the surface, the echoes of those older beliefs still resonate, hidden in plain sight in the symbols and traditions we celebrate to this day. As we pull back the veil on the traditions that have been absorbed into Christian tradition, it becomes clear that these celebrations are deeply rooted in ancient pagan practices, rather than in the life of Jesus or the teachings of Christianity. What we often think of as Christian rituals are, in truth, reflections of humanity's older relationship with nature, the seasons, and the mysteries of existence. Take Christmas, for example. Its timing, near the winter solstice, is no coincidence. Long before the nativity story was conceived, midwinter festivals mark the return of the sun and the promise of new life. The tree, the wreath, and the feast all derive from pagan celebrations like Yule and Saturnalia, honoring the cycles of the earth. Jesus and his earliest followers were Jewish, and Christianity initially emerged as a sect within Judaism. As Christianity began to spread beyond its Jewish origins, it gradually diverged, becoming a distinct religion. Judaism itself had little to do with the Christian absorption of pagan traditions, as Jewish practices were strict, entirely separate, and resistant to the syncretism that Christianity later embraced. The truth is that these holidays, celebrated today as religious observances, have nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. They are remnants of a time when humans sought to connect with the rhythms of the earth, honor the cycles of life and death, and celebrate the forces of renewal and survival. And so, as you gather around your Christmas tree, remember the truth. These traditions are less about divine revelation and more about the resilience of pagan traditions that refused to die, even when entire civilizations were burned to the ground. Perhaps the real miracle isn't in the birth of a man that may not have even existed, or the promise of resurrection, but in the persistence of human alignment with nature, defiant and enduring, beneath the masks of religion and under the stars.